Hi guys, welcome back to Too Cool for Middle School. My name is Megan and this is my classroom, and I'm so excited today to give you 5 tips for history teachers. I currently teach 6th grade ancient history. In the past, I've taught 8th grade US history. I also taught 11th grade US history and 10th grade world history, and it is absolutely my favorite thing to teach. I am a historian, my master's is in history, and I just love all things history. So I'm also very excited today to be collaborating with another history teacher. I met another history teacher on YouTube, yay! If you don't already watch her channel for some reason, her name is Amanda Rose, and she teaches 12th grade history in Brooklyn. And I love her channel. She talks about history, she talks about teaching, she does like makeup tutorials and fashion and tips for new teachers and a lot of the same content that I love to make. So today we're both going to be giving you 5 tips for history teachers. Definitely go check her video out after this one. I can't wait to see what she has to say. I'm looking forward to some new tips for myself. So Amanda and I teach history at the secondary level where we have like specific periods of history class, but this video is also meant for elementary teachers who are history teachers as well. You teach social studies to your students, so hopefully all of these tips will apply to you as well. So this is for anyone teaching history at any level. Okay, so let's jump into the tips. My first tip for you is to expand your own education. I feel like with history, maybe more than any other subject, there's just always so much to know. I've studied a lot of history and I read lots of history books, but all the time I feel like there are so many things that I still need to learn about. And expanding your history education can look very different depending on who you are. So for me, that did mean getting a master's degree in history. That was something that was really important to me, and the work that I did and the research that I did in that program is something that I'm so passionate about. I studied Caribbean history. I wrote a thesis on civil rights in the US Virgin Islands, and that's something that I'm going to be talking about a little bit more on my channel coming up here. I have a lot of videos from like when I was doing my master's and when I was doing all of that research, so if you want to know more about civil rights in the US Virgin Islands, I've got that for you. So I'm going to be doing a little bit more of that coming up, but for me, that is what I wanted to do. I loved taking classes, I loved doing the research, I loved having access to professors and other people in my classes that I just learned so much from. I loved learning about like methodology and theories and how to write well, how to research well. And so I loved learning all about that, and I know that it made me a much better history teacher, but it was also very difficult. It took a long time and it cost a lot of money. I am in a lot of debt now because of that. So that might not be an option for everybody. I totally get that. There are a lot of other things that you can do to further your history education that don't require actually enrolling in a graduate program. And plus, that graduate program is not a finish line either. I already have my master's, but I am still continuing to further my education. So some things that I like to do are just go to lectures. I live in Los Angeles, and so there are so many opportunities here to just go hear from like world-renowned historians and speakers, and I make sure that I'm on like email lists and stuff to find out about all of those things. So if you are also in LA, some things that I like to do are go to lectures at the Huntington Library. They have historians in residence and just people that come in and speak who are like world-renowned historians. Like I went to a few lectures there and got to hear from people that I had like read their work in their books in my master's program, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just like sitting here in a room with them and it's free, and I got to learn so much just, you know, in this one evening sitting there and listening to them. Also at USC, they have a program for educators to learn more about Chinese history, and so I go to their stuff as often as I possibly can. They have like film screenings, they show a lot of documentaries, they bring in people to speak, and they have like a full course that you can take. And at this time, I'm not able to do that because I have a toddler and I'm not able to like get there in time and everything, but it's free. You actually get a stipend if you finish the program, so it's a way to increase your education and actually even make money. They also have webinars and online courses, and a lot of programs have these. So no matter where you are, as long as you have access to the internet, you can pretty much learn about anything you want. Colleges like Harvard offer these open classes where you can watch webinars and listen to lectures and complete courses on your own time. It's really cool that we have access to so much information. One thing I also love to do is go to history conferences and just learn more from my fellow educators and hear how they are implementing these things into their classrooms. This year, I'm very excited to be presenting at a history conference, and I get to share my research on Rothschild Francis, but since it's an education conference, like I've tailored it to like, this is how I would actually teach it to students, because it's one thing to write a thesis and it's another thing to write lessons that middle school or high school students can actually access. So sometimes going to like education focused history conferences is a little bit more useful to you as a teacher. Just straight research conferences might not be quite as useful, but they're very interesting. On a more casual level, you can listen to podcasts. I love podcasts like Revisionist History, and so many of the weekly podcasts on like NPR have a history focus, and you just continue to learn more about the world. And I also love to keep reading history books. I can link whichever side it is, all of the books that I read last year. I have a little review of all 43 books that I read last year, and a lot of them were history books, and some of them were just phenomenal. And another thing I like to do is just watch videos on YouTube. Crash Course is a great channel. They have amazing content, and it's kind of geared towards like high school students, but I learn a lot every single time I watch a video. So just be in the habit of constantly taking in new information about your content. I teach ancient world history, so I'm never gonna know everything there is to know about like ancient China and ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia and ancient India and ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Like there is so much to know. So I'm just trying to constantly gather more information for myself to make myself a better history teacher. Now my second tip can kind of help you deal with all of this information, because that's the thing with history, is that you're always trying to find a balance between breadth and depth. So usually there's a lot that you have to cover, but you don't just want to like give your students like the tiniest bit of information about a whole lot of things, because it's kind of hard for them to connect all of them together. So you also want to be able to go deeply into some of your topics, but sometimes when you do that, it really slows you down and takes you a long time, and then you're not going to finish everything that you're supposed to cover. This is always a challenge for history teachers. So one thing that you can do to kind of balance the breadth and the depth is to establish a theme for your course. This is something that we're really trying to focus on as a history department right now. And so coming up with kind of like essential questions that will apply to all of the units in your entire course is really helpful. It's just very hard to come up with. So for our ancient history course, our question is something like, how do civilizations rise and how do they try to hold on to power? So we can apply that to all of the different ancient civilizations that we look at. And then when I'm like kind of overwhelmed by like ancient Egypt, like there's so many cool lessons that you could do, but really I'm gonna need to get through this in like a month and a half. So what am I really gonna make sure that I include so that we could answer this question? And then are there some things that are like fun, but maybe they can be on the chopping block in case we run out of time? For the 7th grade history department, I think theirs is like sites of encounter, like what happens when two civilizations come together. I think that's a really interesting theme. So they kind of pick up where like 6th grade history leaves off with like the fall of ancient Rome. And so everything that they do is exploring this one theme or this one broad question. And really at one point or another, you kind of are picking a theme or you are picking an essential question, even if you don't officially, because you always have to make choices. You always have to cut things or, you know, decide that you're not really gonna spend much time on this section of the chapter. You're always having to make decisions about like what to give more time to. So it just helps if like at the beginning of the year, you can kind of give yourself a framework for what you're gonna focus on. Tip number 3 is to incorporate literacy and literacy skills. So I'm kind of lucky in that I teach English as well as history, but I don't have the same kids or like even the same grade level for the English classes that I teach and the history classes that I teach. But I do know how to teach like close reading and how to teach writing. So for me, it's pretty natural to bring those skills into my history classes. And I love to work with primary source documents. That's my favorite way to teach. I mean, textbooks are good. I like to have them for the background knowledge, but then as soon as possible, I like to jump into primary source documents and have my students work with texts or artifacts or letters or whatever that we have from that actual time, or secondary sources that people have written about this time, and compare these things, compare ideas, look at the conclusions people came to, try to answer questions with these things. So that's my favorite thing to do, but it requires a lot of literacy skills. They've got to be able to annotate, they have to be able to summarize, they need to be able to express the conclusion that they came to and cite evidence for how they came to that conclusion. And so all of those things incorporate literacy. But that's what history is. Like, if you were a history major, you know you actually read more than like any other department and probably had to write more than any other department. The way that we do history is by reading a ton and then writing a ton. And so if you want to prepare your students to be history majors or to study history in the future, those are the skills that they have to have. It's not just like being able to remember facts or like knowing battles and knowing dates. That's not gonna get you anywhere in history classes in college, or even in any kind of like history discussion with anybody that you have outside of school. You have to be able to process ideas and connect different events and look at the causes and effects and patterns. Like, those are the type of skills that you need, and a lot of that is going to come from reading, and a lot of the way that you learn to express that is through writing and speaking. Tip number 4 is to look for the missing voices in your curriculum. If you teach US history, for example, I'm very passionate about this and I have a lot of videos about this, but if a huge chunk of your curriculum is not based on Native Americans, that is just not accurate US history. There is no way to teach US history without incorporating Native American history, without incorporating Black history, without incorporating women's history. And this is not like pandering to those groups. This is making your history much more accurate. I will say, on the other hand, you need to make sure that you're incorporating the missing voices, but also you don't need to go off topic in order to do that. So whatever course you teach, yes, you are looking for people who were there and maybe whose voices aren't typically in your textbook, but you need to include their perspectives. For me, for example, with ancient world history, it's a little bit harder to do because we just don't have access to as many sources and stuff as like US historians will. But I just remember, like, when I was teaching US history and we would come to like Black History Month, and you know, the school would be like, okay, what are you doing for Black History Month? And I'm like, well, nothing, because that's our whole course. There's no reason for me to put a special focus on it in the month of February, because that's what we've been doing the entire time. So again, we'll use like US history in this as an example. If you're like teaching the Bill of Rights and then it's like Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year, and they're like, what are you doing for Lunar New Year? Well, nothing, because that's not related to what we are doing. So your course is your course, but you do need to look for those voices that may not be in your textbook or curriculum. But then, like, for me, since I teach ancient world, we purposely align our units to match up with different celebrations that occur throughout the year. So again, this is 6th grade, so it's kind of a nice transition from like elementary to middle school to still incorporate like some parties and celebrations. So we always plan our ancient Hebrews unit during Hanukkah so that we can celebrate Hanukkah. We make latkes and all that. I have a bunch of videos on it. Right now it's January and we're doing ancient China because Lunar New Year is next week, and so we're going to incorporate that into our curriculum. Holy Festival is in March, and so we'll be on ancient India during that time. And so there are ways to like seamlessly integrate things. If something is way too choppy and just like totally doesn't fit, I don't think that's necessarily doing good history to like put that in there and just like shove it in and make it fit. But take a look at your curriculum as a whole and see what you can do to make it as inclusive and diverse as possible. Tip number 5 for you is don't reinvent the wheel. There are so many great resources out there, and I feel like one of the struggles of being a history teacher is just trying to find all of those good resources to incorporate in your classroom. I do write some of my own lessons like from scratch, but for history, that includes like reading several books on the topic. That's like a couple months of work right there. And then pulling out like what information is relevant to your standards, and then trying to figure out a way to like rewrite it at a reading level that is appropriate for your students, and then coming up with like an activity that's gonna go with that, and then coming up with an assessment of some kind. Like all of that is very time consuming, and so there's really not a way for you to like invent an entire curriculum for your whole entire course without burning yourself out. So it's not a bad thing to rely on your textbook sometimes. I know not all of us have textbooks, and they're not always like super inclusive, and they're not always super exciting, but you can definitely start with the textbook. And I'm gonna link these below, but I just wanna tell you about some of my favorite resources for history teachers. The Stanford Reading Like a Historian website, I talk about all the time. They have like DBQ style lessons there, and they're like meticulously researched. They're done by people who are getting PhDs at Stanford in history education, and they're really fun. So I love doing those with my students. DBQs in general, I find, are just much more engaging, and so you can Google like DBQ binders, and your school can purchase those for different courses, like in different topics. iCivics is a really fun website that has a bunch of really high quality games. So if you teach government and civics and stuff like that, definitely be on iCivics. It is free. I think it's like the trust of Sandra Day O'Connor, and she left money behind for this project, so it's really cool. Vocabulary is another website that I really love, and they have content for all subjects, but I really like their history stuff. And they recently partnered with Nearpod, and Nearpod is another great website where you can like build your own lessons if you want to, but then they also have pre-made lessons already in there, and they're super high quality. So Nearpod, excellent. Vocabulary, excellent. I will link all of this stuff down below. Facing History in Ourselves is another website that I really love. Plus they have great trainings, like in-person trainings and online trainings. Teaching Tolerance is another website that's a little bit similar. They have lots of pre-made lessons there. They have the social justice standards, which I use in my class. I have those over here, and you can get those for free on my Teachers Pay Teachers site. And then Teachers Pay Teachers. It's always gonna have plenty of stuff that's like very low quality and not any good, but I have found some really great stuff on there. So you just have to find like the good sellers that actually are historians that really do know what they're talking about, and are able to put things together in an organized way so that you're able to teach it easily and students are able to comprehend it and like engage with it. So I put up from time to time lessons on Teachers Pay Teachers. I do have a Caribbean history, like Rothschild Francis lesson up there that I think is amazing. Then nobody else really teaches that, but it's there. So like that's based on my master's degree. So it's definitely something that's very well researched. And I'm working on a new unit, more like a DBQ style unit for US Virgin Islands history as well. Another seller that I really like is Peacefield History. She does US. History from the Middle does a lot that I use because it's all my middle school curriculum. So there's definitely stuff there. You just kind of have to dig through. Plus all of those other websites. So just start collecting like really great lessons for things that you have coming up and try them out, and you can always like tweak them next year and try them again or switch them out. That's the really fun thing about history to me, is that it kind of is like always changing. I'm always finding ways to do things better and incorporate more stories and incorporate more voices. I think you know you're not doing a great job if you teach your history class the exact same way year after year after year. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be adapting to new information and new research and what your students are into that year, and incorporating current events. Oh, can I make that like my number 6? Can that be the 6th tip, is incorporate what is going on right now. Make history relevant to your students. Okay, if I keep talking, I'm gonna end up giving you like 10 tips. So let's stick with the 5.5 for now. Let me know down below some of your favorite resources for teaching history. As history teachers, we gotta like come together, guys. Gotta build this community here. So definitely go support Amanda over on her channel. If you are from her channel and you're coming over here to mine for the first time, please say hi down below. I'd love to meet you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all that good stuff, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.